The phone rang at 2:17 in the morning. Dante Moretti didn't sleep much these days, hadn't since she left, so he was awake in his home office when the unfamiliar number lit up his screen. He almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail like he did with most calls that came through his personal line. But some instinct, honed by years of reading danger and opportunity in the smallest details, made him swipe to accept. "Moretti," he said, his voice rough from disuse and the whiskey he'd been nursing for the past hour. Silence. Then a sound that made his entire body go rigid. A child crying in the background. Not just crying, sobbing with the kind of desperate, inconsolable anguish that tore at something primal in his chest. "Dante," her voice, softer than he remembered, worn thin by exhaustion and something that sounded like defeat. "It's me. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you." He stood so abruptly his chair rolled back and hit the bookshelf behind him. 8 months. 243 days since Sophia had walked out of his life, taking their 2-year-old daughter with her. 243 days of hired investigators finding nothing, of lawyers hitting dead ends, of lying awake, wondering if they were safe, if they were fed, if Sophia had managed to disappear so completely that he would never find them. "Where are you?" The words came out harder than he intended, sharp with the controlled fury that had been building in him since the morning he woke to find half his closet empty, and a note on her pillow that said only, "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. It doesn't matter where I am." Her voice cracked. "Dante, please. I wouldn't call if I had any other choice. I wouldn't, I wouldn't." The crying intensified in the background, and he heard Sophia's voice move away. From the phone, "Shh, baby, it's okay, mommy's here. Please, sweetheart, please try to calm down." But the crying didn't stop. If anything, it grew more frantic, punctuated by a word that drove straight into his heart like a blade. "Papa, want papa, 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 papa." His hand tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. "Is that Aria? Is she hurt? Sophia, if something's happened to her, she's not hurt, not physically." Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper now, trembling with exhaustion and something that sounded like shame. "She's been crying for 3 days straight, Dante. 3 days. She won't eat, won't sleep more than 20 minutes at a time. She just keeps asking for you, and I don't know what to do anymore. I've tried everything. I've sung every song, read every book, promised her the world, but she just wants her papa, and I can't Her voice broke completely. "I can't give her that." Dante moved to the window overlooking the Chicago skyline, his 9, reflection ghostly in the glass. Behind him, his office looked exactly as it had for months. Too neat, too empty, missing the small chaos that Aria used to bring when she would toddle in demanding his attention, her dark curls bouncing, her hazel eyes so like her mother's lighting up when he lifted her into his arms. "Tell me where you are," he said, forcing his voice into something calmer, more controlled. "I'll come to you. I'll talk to her, calm her down, and then we can discuss." "No," sharp and immediate. "No discussions, no negotiations. I just need her to stop crying, Dante. I need her to eat something, to sleep. So I'm asking, and God knows how much this costs me to ask, will you talk to her? Just for a minute, just so she can hear your voice." Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to use this moment of desperation as leverage, to demand answers and location and everything she'd taken from him when she disappeared. But Aria's cries echoed through the phone, hitting him, like physical blows, and he found himself saying, "Put her on." Movement, rustling, and then Sophia's voice soft and coaxing. "Baby, guess what? Mommy has a surprise for you. Can you talk to Mommy for just a second?" The crying hitched, stuttered. "Papa?" "Yes, sweetheart. Papa wants to talk to you. But you have to stop crying so you can hear him, okay?" A sniffle, a shuddering breath, then her voice, so small and hopeful it undid something in Dante's carefully constructed armor. "Papa? Is Papa there?" "I'm here, Principessa." The endearment slipped out in Italian, the language of his childhood that he reserved for the people he loved most. "Papa's here. I'm right here." "Papa." The transformation was immediate. The desperate sobs became hiccuping gasps, then something almost like laughter through her tears. "Papa, Papa, where are you? I miss you so much. Are you coming? Can you come get me, please?" Dante closed his eyes, his free hand pressed flat against the cold window glass. "I miss you too, baby girl. So much. More than all the stars in the sky. That's a lot. Her voice was steadier now, falling into the familiar rhythm of their old conversations. That's more than we can count. Way more than we can count, he agreed, his throat tight. What's wrong, Aria? Your mama says you've been sad. A long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet he had to strain to hear it. I had a bad dream. A really, really bad dream. And when I waked up, you weren't there. You're always there when I have bad dreams, Papa. But you weren't there. And Mama said you were at work. But you've been at work for so many days now, and I miss you and I want you to come home. The pain in her words was matched only by the confusion. She didn't understand. How could she? At 2 years old, how could she possibly comprehend that her parents' marriage had fractured beyond repair? That her mother had taken her away in the night? That the life she'd known had ended without warning or explanation? I know, Principessa. I know it's been a long time. Papa's had to work very far away. But I think about you every single day. Every single minute. Can you come home now? Are you done working far away? Behind him, the door to his office opened. Marco, his head of security, stood in the doorway, phone in hand, mouthing, "Should I trace it?" Dante nodded once, sharp and decisive, even as he kept his voice gentle for his daughter. I want to come home more than anything, baby girl. But right now, Papa needs you to do something for him. Can you be a big, brave girl and do something for Papa? Okay. So trusting, so immediate. It twisted something in his chest. I need you to eat some dinner for Mama, whatever she makes you, even if it's vegetables. He heard her giggle at that, the sound like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. And then I need you to sleep, really sleep, so you can have good dreams instead of bad ones. Can you do that? But I want to see you, Papa. Please? I've been so good. I ate my vegetables yesterday. Well, some of them. The carrots. Not the green ones because they're yucky, but I tried really hard and, Aria. Gentle but firm. Listen to me, sweetheart. I promise you, I'm going to do everything I can to see you very soon. But right now, Mama needs you to be strong and brave. Can you do that for Papa? Another pause. He could almost see her, head tilted to one side, processing his words with that serious expression she got when she was thinking hard about something. Will you call again tomorrow? The question, so simple and yet so loaded with hope, nearly broke him. He looked at Marco, who was typing furiously on his phone, coordinating with their tech team. They needed more time. Every second she stayed on the line increased their chances of triangulating her location. I'll try my very best, Dante said, which was not a lie but not quite a promise either. And you know what? I bet if you're really good for Mama, if you eat and sleep like Papa asked, she might let you call me again. Would you like that? Yes. Can I, Mama? Can I call Papa tomorrow? He heard Sophia's voice, muffled as if she'd moved away from the phone. We'll see, baby. Let's get you some food first, okay? I'm going to eat so much food, Papa. I'm going to eat all the foods, even the green vegetables. Well, maybe not all of them, but some. And then I'm going to sleep for a whole 100 hours and have good dreams about you and... That's my girl. His voice was rough now, emotion threatening to crack through his controlled exterior. I love you, Principessa, more than anything in this whole world. I love you more than all the stars, Papa. That's a lot of love. The most love ever. A pause, then quieter. I have to go now. Mama's making me macaroni, the kind with the cheese you make in the special way. From my recipe, Dante thought with a sharp twist of something bitter. Sophia had always claimed she couldn't cook, but he learned his mother's macaroni and cheese recipe specifically for Aria, sitting in their kitchen while his mother patiently walked her through each step in accented English mixed with Italian. Enjoy your dinner, baby. Be good. Bye, Papa. I love you up to the moon and back around the world. I love you to the moon and back around the world and all through the stars. He completed their ritual, the words hollow with all the nights he hadn't been able to say them. Then Sophia was back on the line, her voice low and urgent. Thank you. I know that cost you. To not push, to not demand. Thank you. How long? He asked, his voice hard now that Aria couldn't hear him. How long has she been like this? I told you. 3 days. No. How long has she been asking for me? The silence stretched long enough that he had his answer before she spoke. Since the 2nd week. At first, I could distract her, tell her you were at work, that you'd call soon. But as the weeks went by, she started having nightmares, waking up screaming for you, and then 3 days ago, something shifted. She just broke, started crying, and hasn't really stopped since. You did this. The words were quiet, controlled, but with an undercurrent of fury he didn't bother to hide. You took her from the only home she'd ever known, from her father, from her grandmother, from everything familiar and safe. And you're surprised she's traumatized? Don't. Sophia's voice cracked. Don't you dare make this about my choices when your choices are what drove me away in the first place. My choices kept you safe. Keep her safe. I built a fortress around our family. You built a prison, she interrupted, her exhaustion giving way to an anger that matched his own. You smothered us with your protection. You controlled every aspect of our lives. Where I could go, who I could see, what I could do. I couldn't have coffee with a friend without 3 armed guards watching from the next table. I couldn't take Aria to the park without a security sweep. That's not safe, Dante. That's captivity. And look how well your freedom is working out, he shot back. Our daughter cried for 3 days straight. You are so desperate you have to call the man you claim kept you prisoner. Tell me, Sophia, how's your independence treating you? He heard her breath hitch, knew he'd struck a nerve, and felt no satisfaction in it. Only a weary, hollow ache that had been his constant companion since she left. This was a mistake, she whispered. I shouldn't have called. Wait. The word came out sharper than he intended. He forced himself to take a breath, to think past the anger and hurt to what mattered. Please. Wait. She didn't hang up. He heard her breathing on the other end of the line, ragged and exhausted. I'm sorry, he said, the words unfamiliar and difficult. Dante Moretti did not apologize. Not in business, not to his associates, not to his enemies. But for Sophia, for Aria, he would swallow. His pride. That was cruel. You're doing the best you can. Am I? A bitter laugh. Because my best seems to involve breaking our daughter's heart every single day. Let me help. How? By showing up and taking her away from me? By using your resources and your power to make sure I never see her again? That's what this is, isn't it? That's why you had me stay on the line so long. You're tracing the call right now. He didn't deny it. Couldn't. She knew him too well. I deserve to know where my daughter is, he said instead. I deserve to be in her life. You want to be in her life? Sophia's voice rose slightly, stress and exhaustion making her reckless. Then leave yours behind. Walk away from the Moretti family business. Stop being the man everyone in this city either fears or wants to destroy. Become someone whose daughter can go to school without needing armed escorts. Someone whose wife can sleep at night without wondering if this is the night your enemies come through the door. You know I can't do that. Then you know why I left. Marco appeared in Dante's peripheral vision, holding up his phone. On the screen, a map with a slowly narrowing search radius. They were close. Another few minutes, and they'd have her exact location. Sophia, Dante said carefully. I understand you're scared. I understand that my world, our world, can be overwhelming. But running doesn't make you safer. It makes you vulnerable. Without my protection, without my resources, you're exposed to every enemy who might want to use you and Aria against me. That's the thing, Dante. You still don't get it. Your protection is what makes us targets in the first place. If we're not with you, we're just 2 ordinary people living an ordinary life. No one's looking for us. No one cares. You think it's that simple? You think you can just disappear and everyone forgets you're my wife? That Aria is my daughter? You're naive if you believe that. Or maybe you're paranoid, she countered. Maybe not everything is a threat. Maybe not everyone is an enemy. Maybe the only danger Aria faces is growing up thinking her father's way of living is normal. That landed like a physical blow. The idea that his daughter might one day look at him and see a monster, a man to fear rather than love, was more painful than any betrayal, any business loss, any physical wound he'd ever endured. I would never let anything happen to her, he said, his voice low and intense. Or to you. You must know that. I do know that. Her voice softened marginally. I've always known that. But Dante, there are different kinds of harm. There's physical danger, yes, but there's also the harm of growing up in a world where violence is normal, where armed guards are just part of the furniture, where daddy's business meetings happen behind closed doors with men who carry guns and speak in codes. I don't want that for her. And I don't want her crying for 3 days because her father has been erased from her life, he replied. Surely there's a middle ground, a way for me to be in her life without dragging her into my world. Is there? Because in our entire marriage, I never saw that middle ground. It was all or nothing with you. Total security or total control, depending on how you looked at it. Marco tapped his watch, then held up 3 fingers. 3 minutes, maybe less, until they had a location. Dante turned away from him, focusing entirely on Sophia's voice, on the conversation that felt like their marriage in miniature. 2 people who loved each other but couldn't find a way to exist in the same space without causing pain. "What do you want from me?" he asked, and was surprised to find he genuinely wanted to know. Right now, in this moment, what would make this better? She was quiet for so long, he thought she might have ended the call. Then, barely audible, "I want you to let us go, to accept that this is better for everyone, even if it doesn't feel that way. Right now. I want you to stop looking for us, and let us build a life where Aria can be normal, where she can go to school and make friends and not have to think about security protocols and safe rooms and all the things that were just part of her daily routine." "I can't do that." The words were out, before he could consider them, automatic and absolute. "I won't give up on you, on her. There has to be another way." "There isn't, Dante. I've looked for it. I've tried to imagine it. But your world and the world I want for Aria, they're incompatible. You can't be half in the Moretti family business. You can't be partly the man everyone fears. It's all or nothing. And I chose nothing because at least then Aria has a chance at something like a normal childhood. Even if that childhood involves her crying for her father? Even if it traumatizes her more than my world ever would have? That's not fair. None of this is fair," he said, his control finally slipping, allowing some of the rage and hurt he'd been suppressing for 8 months to leak into his voice. "You didn't give me a choice. You didn't talk to me, didn't fight with me, didn't try to work something out. You just left. In the middle of the night like a thief, taking the most precious thing in my life and vanishing. You want to talk about harm? About trauma? How do you think it felt to wake up and find you gone? To check Aria's room and see her crib empty? To read that pathetic excuse for a goodbye note and realize you valued your principles more than you valued our family? That's not..." She stopped, and he heard her take a shaky breath. "It wasn't about principles, Dante. It was about survival. Your mother stopped by that day, do you remember? The day before I left?" He frowned. "My mother visits every week. She told me about the threat, the one you didn't mention, the one you thought I didn't need to know about." Dante's blood ran cold. "What did she tell you?" "That the Salvatores were making noise, about the North Side territory, that there had been an incident at one of your warehouses, that she was worried about me and Aria being in the house, and maybe we should go stay at the lake house for a while until things cooled down." Her voice hardened. "Your mother, Dante, was worried enough to suggest we leave, but you said nothing. You came home that night, kissed Aria goodnight, made love to me, and said nothing about any threat. You just expected me to trust your protection, to be a good little wife and not ask questions about why security had doubled or why you were meeting with your lieutenants at all hours." He remembered that week. Remembered the escalating tension with the Salvatore family, a dispute over territory that had threatened to turn violent. He'd handled it, ultimately, negotiating a settlement that avoided bloodshed. But he also remembered making the conscious choice not to tell Sophia, not wanting to worry her when he was confident he could resolve the situation. "I was protecting you from unnecessary fear," he said, but even to his own ears it sounded weak. "You were protecting yourself from accountability," she corrected. "If I didn't know about the threat, I couldn't object to your response to it. I couldn't question whether the risk was worth it, whether the business was worth it. I was just supposed to smile and trust and exist in the bubble you'd built around me. So you left because my mother mentioned a situation I had already contained? That's your justification for taking my daughter and disappearing? I left because in that moment I realized I would never have a choice. I would always be kept in the dark about the dangers surrounding us. I would always be expected to simply accept your decisions about our safety, our lives, our future. And I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't raise Aria in an environment where she learned that fathers make all the decisions, and mothers just nod and smile and pretend everything is fine." Marco held, picking up his phone, showing Dante a street address in Evanston, a small apartment complex on the north side of the city, barely 40 minutes away. She'd been less than an hour from him this entire time. The revelation should have filled him with triumph, with the satisfaction of finally having found her after months of searching. Instead, he felt only a deep, weary sadness, because he knew what came next, knew what he would do with this information, and knew that Sophia would see it as the ultimate betrayal, proof that every fear she'd had about his need for control was justified. "I need to go," Sophia said abruptly. "Aria's finished eating. I need to get her to bed." "One more thing," Dante said quickly, before she could end the call. "Tomorrow, same time. Let me talk to her again. Please." "Dante. Not for me. For her. You said she won't sleep. Let me help. Let me talk to her before bed. Help her settle. You don't have to see me. Don't have to let me into your life. Just let me speak. My daughter. That's all I'm asking." He could hear her internal struggle in the silence that followed. As a mother, she wanted what would help Aria. As a woman who'd fled from him, she knew each call would tighten the threads connecting them, make it harder to maintain the separation she'd sought. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "you have to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you won't show up at my door, that you'll respect my boundaries, that you'll let this be on my terms." It was a promise he had no intention of keeping. The address burned in his mind, and nothing she could say would keep him from going to where his daughter slept. But he also knew that agreeing now meant another conversation tomorrow, another chance to hear Aria's voice, another opportunity to work toward a solution that didn't involve lawyers and custody battles, and destroying what was left of his relationship with Sophia. "I promise," he lied, and hated himself a little for it. "Tomorrow then. 2 in the morning again. Aria should be asleep by then, and if she wakes like she has been, I'll let you talk to her." "Thank you." A bitter laugh. "Don't thank me. This doesn't change anything between us, Dante. It's for Aria, not for you." "I know." After she hung up, Dante stood in the silence of his office, phone still pressed to his ear, staring at the Chicago skyline. Marco approached cautiously, recognizing the danger in his boss's stillness. "Sir, do you want me to send a team?" Dante lowered the phone slowly, his mind already working through the options, the angles, the most effective way to handle this. He could send his men tonight, have them watching the building by dawn, confirming that Sophia and Aria were where the trace indicated. He could show up himself, force a confrontation, use every legal and extra-legal resource at his disposal to ensure he never lost contact with his daughter again. Or he could wait. Could play Sophia's game for a little while longer. Could use these phone calls to rebuild some shred of trust, to remind her of who he'd been when they first met, before the weight of the Moretti family business had calmed him into someone harder, colder, more willing to control than to compromise. "No team," he said finally. "Not yet." Marco's surprise was evident. "Sir, with all due respect, we have the location. We could have confirmation within the hour. Eyes on them by morning. If you're worried about a confrontation—" "It's not about confrontation," Dante interrupted. "It's about strategy. Sophia is barely holding on. Another day or two of Aria crying, of being unable to cope, and she'll be desperate enough to accept help beyond a phone call. When people are desperate, they make concessions they wouldn't normally consider. You're going to let your daughter continue crying?" Marco's tone was carefully neutral, but Dante heard the judgment beneath it. "I'm going to give my wife enough rope to realize she needs me," he corrected. "There's a difference." But even as he said it, he heard Aria's voice in his head, small and heartbroken, asking when Papa would come home. He saw Sophia's face in his memory, exhausted and defeated, calling him in the middle of the night because she was out of options. What kind of man, he wondered, used his family's pain as leverage? The same kind of man who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd protected his people with calculated ruthlessness, who'd learned early that compassion was a weakness his enemies would exploit. The same kind of man who'd loved Sophia so completely that he'd smothered her with his protection. The same kind of man who'd rather see his daughter crying than not see her at all. "Tomorrow night I want surveillance on the address," he told Marco. "Discreet. I don't want Sophia to know we've found them. Just eyes on the building, confirmation of their routine, and get me everything about that neighborhood. Safety statistics, demographics, known criminals in the fire diz, area. I want to know every risk factor. And if the risk is significant, then we'll have justification for a more direct approach." Dante poured himself another whiskey, the burn of it failing to warm the cold settling in his chest. "But until then, we wait, we watch, and we let Sophia believe she still has control." Marco nodded and left, pulling out his phone to coordinate the surveillance team. Alone again, Dante moved to the window, looking out at the city that bore his family's imprint, where his word was law in certain circles, where his power and influence extended into corners most citizens never knew existed. But for all that power, he couldn't make his wife come home, couldn't make his daughter stop crying, couldn't fix the fundamental problem that had driven Sophia away, the incompatibility between the life he'd built and the life she wanted for their family. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Is it true?" Marco said. Sophia called. "Is my granddaughter well?" Dante stared at the message, considering his response. His mother, Rosa Moretti, matriarch of the family since his father's death 10 years ago, had always seen through his carefully constructed facades. She'd known, probably before he had, that his marriage was in trouble. She'd tried to warn him, had told him that treating Sophia like a possession to be protected rather than a partner to be consulted would end badly. He dismissed her concerns. After all, what did she know about his generation? About the modern world? About the sophisticated threats that required sophisticated security measures? Apparently, she'd known everything. She called, he typed back. "Aria has been crying for 3 days. Sophia let me talk to her." The response came immediately. And Aria wants her papa. But Sophia won't let me see her. Did you demand it? Did you threaten? Did you do what you always do when you don't get your way? He scowled at the phone. His mother's directness was legendary in the family. One of the reasons she'd been such an effective partner to his father and, later, such a formidable advisor to Dante himself. But sometimes her insights cut too close to bone. "I traced the call. I know where they are." A longer pause this time. "Then, and now you'll do what? Storm in and take them? Make Sophia hate you even more? Prove that every fear she had was justified? She's my wife. Aria's my daughter. I have rights. Rights won't make them love you, Figlio. Rights won't repair what's broken." Dante threw the phone onto his desk harder than necessary, the clatter of it against wood satisfying in its violence. Everyone had opinions about how he should handle this situation. Marco thought he should send in a team. His lawyers thought he should file for custody. His business associates thought he was being weak, that a woman and child leaving him reflected poorly on his authority and control. But no one, not a single person, seemed to understand the impossible position he was in. If he forced Sophia back, she would resent him forever. If he let her go, he lost his daughter. If he compromised on security, he risked their safety. If he maintained his protocols, he drove them further away. There was no winning move, only variations of loss. He picked up the phone again, pulling up the photos he'd saved. Hundreds of them, chronicling Aria's life from birth to the day they disappeared. Her first smile, her first tooth, the day she took her first steps, tottering toward him with that expression of fierce determination that reminded him so much of himself. Christmas morning, her tiny hands tearing into presents while Sophia laughed in the background, her hair messed and her face bright with joy. They'd been happy once, or he'd thought they were happy. But maybe Sophia had been pretending even then, going through the motions of contentment while planning her escape. No, that wasn't fair. He'd seen genuine love in her eyes, felt it in her touch, heard it in her laughter. Whatever had driven her away, it wasn't a lack of love, it was fear. Fear of his world, fear of what that world might do to Aria, fear of losing herself completely in the role of Dante Moretti's wife. Could he blame her for that fear? Could he honestly say it was irrational? His phone buzzed again, this time, an unknown number. For a wild moment, he thought it might be Sophia calling back, but the message was brief and impersonal, tracing complete. Address confirmed, 847 Maple Street, Apt 3B, Evanston. Female and small child matching descriptions confirmed by building manager. Surveillance team deploying now. So it was real. They were there, less than an hour away, sleeping or trying to sleep in some small apartment that probably had thin walls and questionable security. Every protective instinct screamed at him to go now, to check the building himself, to ensure the locks were adequate and the neighborhood safe and his family protected. But he'd made a promise. Well, a lie, masquerading as a promise, but still. He'd told Sophia he wouldn't show up at her door, that he'd respect her boundaries. How long could he maintain that fiction? How many nights of Aria crying before his restraint snapped? How much of this pain was he supposed to endure in the name of giving Sophia space? He had his answer by dawn. 22 hours until the next call. 22 hours of knowing exactly where they were but forcing himself to stay away. 22 hours of imagining Aria's face, tear-stained and hopeful, asking when Papa would come home. It might as well have been 22 years. Dante didn't sleep. Instead, he spent the hours before dawn doing what he did best, gathering information and building a strategy. By 6 in the morning, he had a complete profile of 847 Maple Street. The building was a modest 3-story walk-up built in the 1970s, converted from apartments to condos in 2010. Apartment 3B was a 1-bedroom unit, 640 square feet, owned by a holding company that rented month to month at rates well below market value. The neighborhood was working class, neither particularly dangerous nor especially safe. 2 blocks from a public park, 3 blocks from a 24-hour convenience store, half a mile from the nearest L station. The building itself had minimal security, a front door that locked, theoretically, but the mechanism was old and easily bypassed. No doorman, no security cameras in the common areas, no controlled access beyond a buzzer system that half the residents propped open for convenience. The locks on the individual apartment doors were basic, the windows accessible from the fire escape, the parking lot behind the building poorly lit, and offering multiple approach vectors for anyone wanting to gain entry. In short, it was a security nightmare. "Sir?" Marco appeared in the doorway of his office, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He set one in front of Dante without waiting for one. Acknowledgement. The morning surveillance report just came in. Dante took the coffee, bitter and black, the way he preferred it. And? Female matching Sophia's description left the building at 5:45. Walked to the bus stop on the corner, heading south. One of our people followed at a distance. She got off at the medical district, went into Chicago General Hospital through the staff entrance. She's working there. That explained how Sophia had been supporting herself. Before their marriage, she'd been a pediatric nurse, good at her job and passionate about it. She'd stopped working after Aria was born, partly because Dante had wanted her home with their daughter, partly because the security requirements of being a Moretti made regular employment complicated. Apparently, she'd gone back to her old profession. It was smart, actually. Hospitals ran background checks, but a fake name and forged credentials wouldn't be difficult for someone motivated enough. And nursing paid, well enough to afford a cheap apartment and basic necessities. "What about Aria?" he asked, the question tightening something in his chest. Still inside the apartment. "We have visual confirmation through the 3rd-floor window. A woman, approximately 60 years old, arrived at 5:30. Building manager identified her as Mrs. Chen, lives in 2A. Apparently, she watches the child while the mother works. So Sophia had found a babysitter, some elderly neighbor who probably had no idea who her employers really were, who was caring for the daughter of one of Chicago's most powerful crime families, without any of the security protocols or protective measures that should be in place. The thought of his daughter in the care of a stranger, in an unsecured apartment, in a neighborhood where his protection couldn't reach her, made his blood pressure spike dangerously. "I want a full background check on Mrs. Chen," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Everything. Criminal record, financial history, family connections, medical records. I want to know if she's qualified to care for a child, if there are any red flags, anything that would indicate Aria is at risk." "Already in progress," Marco assured him. "Preliminary results should be ready by this afternoon. But sir, from what our people observed, she seems competent. She arrived on time, let herself in with a key, and within 10 minutes had the child fed and settled. No signs of distress or neglect. No signs of distress. As if that made it acceptable that his daughter was being cared for by some random woman instead of by her father, in her own home, surrounded by people who would die to protect her. What time does Sophia's shift end?" 3 in the afternoon, according to the hospital schedule we accessed. She should be back at the apartment by 4, maybe 4:30, depending on the bus schedule. Dante glanced at the clock. That gave him almost 10 hours. 10 hours in which Aria would be with this Mrs. Chen, in that inadequate apartment, while Sophia worked at a hospital where anyone could access her, follow her home, discover who she really was. The paranoia was old and familiar, a constant companion since he'd taken over the family business at 25 after his father's assassination. Everyone was a potential threat. Every vulnerability was a liability. Trust no one completely, control everything you could, and prepare for the worst-case scenario at all times. It had kept him alive. It had built his empire. And it had destroyed his marriage. "I want you to pull in Carlo," Dante said, naming one of his most trusted associates. "Have him do a security assessment of the building, quietly. I want to know every access point, every weakness, every way someone could get to them." Marco hesitated. "Sir, if we increase our presence in the area, there's a risk Sophia will notice. She knows how you operate. She'll be looking for signs of surveillance. Then make sure she doesn't see them, Dante replied coldly. I'm not asking for a visible security team. I'm asking for information. By tonight, I want to know everything about that building, that neighborhood, and anyone who might pose a threat to my family. Understood. Marco paused at the door. Your mother called while you were reviewing the files. She wants to know if you're planning to attend the Benedetti wedding next week. Dante had forgotten about the wedding. Giovanni Benedetti's daughter was marrying the son of another prominent family, the kind of elaborate affair that served as much as a business networking opportunity as a celebration. Under normal circumstances, Dante would be expected to attend, to show respect, and maintain alliances. But these weren't normal circumstances. Tell her I'll let her know, he said dismissively. Right now, I have more important concerns. After Marco left, Dante returned to the surveillance photos on his computer. The images were grainy, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, but they showed enough. The building's exterior, shabby but maintained, the third-floor windows with their thin curtains, a blurred figure visible briefly in one shot, too indistinct to make out features but recognizably child-sized. Aria, right there, less than an hour's drive away, his hands curled into fists on the desk. The urge to get in his car and go to her was almost overwhelming. He could be there in 40 minutes, could ring the buzzer, force his way past this Mrs. Chen if necessary, and hold his daughter in his arms again. But then what? Sophia would know he'd broken his promise, would know she couldn't trust anything he said, would know that his word meant nothing when it conflicted with his desires, and any slim chance he had of reconciliation, of finding a way to make this work without lawyers and courts, and a custody battle that would destroy what was left of their family, would evaporate. So instead, he sat in his office and stared at surveillance, photos of a building where his daughter lived without him, and tried to convince himself that patience was a strategy rather than a torture. His phone rang at 9. His mother, persistent as always. Dante, Marco tells me you found them. Good morning to you too, Mama. Don't play games with me, Figlio. I want to know what you're planning. He leaned back in his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose against the headache building behind his eyes. I'm planning to talk to my daughter tonight when Sophia calls. Beyond that, I'm still deciding. You're planning to ambush them, Rosa corrected, her accent thickening the way it always did when she was agitated. You're planning to use your resources and your power to force Sophia back, and it will be a disaster. My resources and power are what kept them safe for 2 years. Dante shot back. Forgive me if I think they're better off with protection than living in some run-down apartment in a questionable neighborhood. Safe from what? Dante? Safe from whom? His mother's voice rose slightly. You act as if Sophia and Aria are under constant threat, but the truth is, the threats come because of you, because of our family, because of the business. Without you, they're just two ordinary people living an ordinary life. That's what Sophia said, he muttered. And it's just as naive coming from you. Our enemies don't forget. Don't forgive. Don't stop being threats just because Sophia moved to a cheaper neighborhood. Our enemies, Rosa repeated. Listen to yourself. You speak as if you're at war, as if the whole world is against us. But Dante, most of the threats you prepare for never materialize. Most of the security measures you implement are theater, performance, a way of maintaining control rather than ensuring safety. Tell that to my father, Dante said, his voice dropping into dangerous territory. Tell him that the security measures were just theater when they found him in that warehouse with 3 bullets in his chest. The silence that followed was heavy with old grief. Antonio Moretti's death had reshaped their family, thrust Dante into leadership before he was ready, and taught Rosa that the world her husband had inhabited was more brutal than she'd wanted to acknowledge. Your father's death was a tragedy, Rosa said finally, her voice softer now. But it was also the consequence of choices he made, enemies he created, lines he crossed. You don't have to follow the same path. You don't have to build your life around preparation for violence. So what would you have me do? Abandon the family business? Walk away from everything Papa built? I would have you choose what matters most, the business or your family. Because Dante, you cannot have both. Sophia has made that clear. The question is, what are you willing to sacrifice? It was the same impossible choice, stated in different words. Give up his identity, his power, his responsibility to the family and the people who depended on him, or lose his wife and daughter. I shouldn't have to choose, he said. hearing the frustration in his own voice. Other men manage to balance family and work. Why is it different for me? You know why, Rosa replied gently. Because your work isn't ordinary work. It carries consequences that most men never face. And until you're willing to acknowledge that, until you're willing to change what needs changing, you will keep losing the people you love. After she hung up, Dante sat in the silence of his office and tried to imagine it, tried to picture himself walking away from the Moretti family business, from the empire his grandfather had founded and his father had expanded. Tried to see himself as an ordinary man with an ordinary job, living in an ordinary house without armed guards and security protocols, and the weight of legacy pressing down on his shoulders. The image wouldn't form. He'd been groomed for this role since childhood, had absorbed the rules and responsibilities and ruthless pragmatism of the family business before he was old enough to understand what it meant. The Moretti name was his identity. The power was his inheritance. The control was his birthright. But Aria was his heart. And Sophia, despite everything, despite the pain and anger and betrayal, still occupied a space in his chest that ached when he thought about her. Not the woman who'd left him, but the woman he'd met 6 years ago. The nurse who'd treated him in the emergency room after a business dispute turned physical, who'd lectured him about the stupidity of street fighting while stitching up his split knuckle with competent hands and an exasperated expression. She'd been fearless then, unimpressed by his name or his reputation, seeing only a man who'd been foolish enough to settle a disagreement with his fists instead of his words. He'd been intrigued by her refusal to be intimidated, charmed by her directness, and ultimately captivated by the way she looked at him, as if he were human rather than legendary. When had that changed? When had he stopped being Dante to her and become only the Moretti heir, the crime boss, the man whose world she needed to escape? He knew the answer, though he didn't want to examine it too closely. It had been gradual, a slow accretion of security measures and restrictions and incidents that revealed the reality beneath the romance. The night gunshots shattered their bedroom window, and he'd covered her body with his own, snarling orders into his phone while she trembled beneath him. The morning she'd found blood on his shirt and he'd brushed off her concerns with vague explanations about business. The dinner party, where she'd overheard 2 of his associates casually discussing the resolution of a problem, and he'd seen in her eyes the moment she understood what resolution meant in his world. Each incident had added another layer of security, another restriction on her freedom, another reminder that being Mrs. Dante Moretti came with costs as well as benefits. And he'd told himself it was necessary, that he was protecting her, that she would adjust given time. Instead, she'd run. His computer chimed with an incoming message, the background check on Mrs. Chen. He opened it, scanning the details with the same analytical focus he brought to all business matters. Melissa Chen, age 63, widow of Harold Chen, who died 4 years ago of heart disease. 1 daughter, living in Seattle with 2 grandchildren. Mrs. Chen visited twice a year. Clean criminal record, excellent credit. 30 years of experience as an elementary school teacher before retirement. References from 3 other families in the building who she'd babysat for over the past 2 years. In short, she was exactly what she appeared to be. A kind, competent grandmother type who supplemented her pension by caring for neighbors' children. The kind of person any parent would be lucky to have watching their kid. The kind of person who should never be responsible for protecting the daughter of Dante Moretti. Because Mrs. Chen, for all her competence and kindness, had no idea what to do if someone came looking for Aria, had no training in security protocols, no weapons, no way of calling for help that would bring anything more threatening than local police. She was a civilian in every sense, as vulnerable as the child in her care. The thought made Dante's hands shake slightly as he closed the file. Sophia had thought she was making Aria safer by removing her from his world, but she'd actually done the opposite. She'd stripped away every layer of protection, every safeguard, every contingency plan that Dante had meticulously constructed. If anyone wanted to hurt him through his daughter, Sophia had made it devastatingly easy. His phone buzzed. A text from Carlo. Building assessment complete. Confirms our initial assessment. Recommend immediate intervention. Dante's jaw clenched. Every second that Aria remained in that apartment was a second too long. He was reaching for his keys, planning already how quickly he could get there, when another text came through. This one from the surveillance team. Subject returning early. Repeat. Sophia Moretti approaching the building. ETA 3 minutes. Dante froze. It was barely noon. Sophia wasn't supposed to be back for hours. Had something happened? Was Aria sick? Had there been an incident that sent Sophia rushing home? He pulled up the live feed from the team's vehicle. Grainy video showed Sophia walking quickly down the street, her stride purposeful, her expression difficult to make out at this distance. She looked tired. That much was clear even through the poor video quality. Her shoulders were hunched against the cold November wind, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her scrubs visible beneath an inadequate jacket. She looked nothing like the woman he'd married. Sophia had worn designer clothes, had her hair professionally styled, and had moved through the world with the quiet confidence that came from knowing she was protected and provided for. This Sophia looked like any other overworked nurse, invisible in the crowd, just another exhausted woman trying to make ends meet. The video showed her approaching the building, digging in her pocket for keys. She disappeared inside, and a minute later, a light came on in the third-floor window. Movement behind the curtain, indistinct shapes that could be Sophia and Mrs. Chen and Aria, his family. Right there, so close he could be with them in less than an hour. Dante picked up his phone, thumb hovering over Marco's number. One call, that's all it would take. Marco would have a team there in minutes, securing the building, ensuring no one could get in or out without Dante's approval. He could be there himself within the hour, could take control of the situation, could bring his family home where they belonged. But Sophia's words from last night echoed in his mind. Your protection is what makes us targets in the first place. Was she right? Was his presence in their lives more dangerous than his absence? Or was that just an excuse? A rationalization that let her pretend running away was the moral choice rather than simply the easier one. He didn't know anymore. The certainties that had guided him his entire adult life suddenly seemed less solid, more open to question. Maybe his mother was right. Maybe the threats he prepared for were largely of his own creation. Maybe Aria would be safer as an ordinary child than as a Moretti. Or maybe that was all wishful thinking, a fantasy that ignored the brutal realities of the world he inhabited. His phone rang, interrupting his circular thoughts. An unknown number, but he answered anyway, hoping irrationally that it might be Sophia calling early. Moretti, a voice he didn't recognize, male, rough with the particular accent of South Chicago. Heard you lost something. A wife and kid, maybe? Gotta be embarrassing, losing track of your own family like that. Every muscle in Dante's body tensed. Who is this? A low laugh. Someone who knows things. Saw your people sniffing around Evanston this morning. Very sloppy, by the way. If I notice, others will too. And once others know where your pretty wife and little girl are hiding. He let the implication hang. If you're trying to threaten me, not threatening Moretti. Offering advice? You want to keep them safe? Better do it properly. That neighborhood, that building, that old Chinese lady babysitter? Not gonna cut it when people start looking. And people are always looking, aren't they? For leverage, for weakness, for ways to get to the great Dante Moretti. The line went dead. Dante stared at his phone, rage and fear warring in his chest. The caller was right. He'd been careful with the surveillance, but careful wasn't the same as invisible. If one person had noticed, others might as well. And once word spread that Dante Moretti's estranged wife and daughter were living unprotected in Evanston, every enemy, every rival, every ambitious criminal looking to make a name for himself would see an opportunity. He'd been trying to respect Sophia's wishes, to give her space, to prove he could be patient. But patience wasn't a virtue when it put his family at risk. He called Marco. How many people do we have available right now? For what purpose, sir? Relocation. I want Sophia and Aria moved to a secure location within the next 6 hours. Have someone find a safe house, somewhere comfortable but defendable. And I want a full security team in place before nightfall. Sir, if we move them without Sophia's consent, she'll be angry, Dante finished. She'll accuse me of exactly what she's accused me of all along, but she'll be alive to do it, and that's what matters. Understood. Do you want us to wait until she's alone, or... No. Do it now, while Mrs. Chen is there. I want a witness, someone who can confirm that Sophia and Aria weren't harmed, that this was about protection, not abduction. He paused, thinking through the logistics. And Marco? Make sure the team knows. Minimal force. Sophia is not to be restrained or frightened. Explain what's happening, give her my number to call, but do not take no for an answer. She and Aria are coming home, even if home needs to be somewhere other than the estate until this is resolved. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one." After he hung up, Dante sat back in his chair and waited for the inevitable. Within the hour, Sophia would know he'd found them, would know he'd broken his promise, would know that every fear she'd had about his need for control had been justified. But she would also be safe. She and Aria would be in a place where he could protect them, where no anonymous caller could threaten them, where the security was adequate and the threats were managed. That had to count for something. That had to matter more than kept promises and respected boundaries. Didn't it? His phone rang 27 minutes later. Sophia's number, the one she'd called from last night. He answered. "Sophia, you bastard." Her voice shook with fury and something that might have been tears. "You promised. You looked me in the eye, or your voice did at least, and you promised you wouldn't do this. I had no choice. You always have a choice, Dante. That's what you've never understood. You choose to control, you choose to manipulate, you choose to prioritize your way over everyone else's autonomy. I believed you when you said you'd respect my boundaries, and I was a fool for it." "Someone called me," he said, his voice tight. "Someone who knew where you were. Someone who made it very clear that my surveillance had been noticed, and that if they'd noticed, others would too. I couldn't leave you in there, Sophia. I couldn't risk. So you sent armed men to my apartment. You terrified Mrs. Chen. You confused Aria, and you're dragging us. God knows where to some safe house that I'll have no control over, no say in, no ability to leave when I want, just like always. It's temporary, just until I can identify the threat and neutralize it. There's always a threat, Dante. There's always something that justifies your control. Today it's a phone call. Tomorrow it'll be a rival family making noise. Next week it'll be some other excuse. It never ends because you don't want it to end. You need the threats to justify the cage you've built. That's not— "Where's Aria?" she interrupted. "I want to talk to her. I want to make sure she's okay." "She's fine. She's with two of my most trusted people. Both women. Both trained in childcare as well as security. They're taking her to the safe house now. You'll be reunited within the hour. I want to talk to her now." "That's not possible. They're in transit." A long pause. When Sophia spoke again, her voice was colder than he'd ever heard it. "This is kidnapping, Dante. You've kidnapped your own daughter." "I've protected my daughter," he corrected. "There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. From where I'm standing, you've proven that every fear I had was justified, that you can't be trusted, that your word means nothing when it conflicts with what you want, that my choices, my autonomy, my rights as Aria's mother don't matter when they inconvenience your plans." Each word hit like a physical blow, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I know you're angry. I know this feels like a betrayal. But Sophia, I received a credible threat. I can play you the recording if you want. Someone out there knows where you are, knows about Aria, and was making thinly veiled implications about what could happen to you both. What kind of father would I be if I ignored that? What kind of husband?" "You're not my husband," she said, the words quiet but devastating. "Not anymore. We're divorced, remember? You don't get to make these decisions for me." The divorce was never finalized. He reminded her, perhaps cruelly. "You're still legally my wife. Aria is legally my daughter. I have every right." "Rights." She laughed bitterly. "You're going to lecture me about rights while holding me prisoner? While kidnapping my child? God, Dante, do you even hear yourself?" He did hear himself, and hated what he heard. The cold calculation, the legal justifications, the prioritization of security over consent. Everything Sophia had run from, distilled into one horrible conversation. "I'm sorry," he said, the words inadequate but sincere. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but I had no choice. Not if I wanted to keep you safe." "You always have a choice," she repeated. "You just always choose wrong." She hung up. Dante sat in the silence of his office, phone still pressed to his ear, and acknowledged the truth he'd been avoiding. Rosa was right. Sophia was right. He couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep choosing control over trust, security over freedom, his way over partnership, but he also couldn't watch his family live unprotected in an inadequate apartment, vulnerable to anyone who wanted to use them against him. Couldn't spend every moment wondering if today would be the day some enemy made their move. So where did that leave them? What was the solution when both choices led to disaster? His computer chimed. An update from the relocation team. Subject secured. No resistance. Child slightly distressed but calming. Mother cooperative once situation explained. ETA to the safe house 45 minutes. 45 minutes until Sophia and Aria were in a location he controlled, surrounded by security he trusted, protected by measures he'd personally approved. 45 minutes until he could breathe without the constant anxiety that had plagued him since that anonymous call. But also, 45 minutes until Sophia's already fragile trust in him was completely destroyed. He'd saved them, and in doing so, had perhaps lost them forever. The irony wasn't lost on him. But as with so many things in his life, understanding the problem didn't mean he knew how to solve it. So he sat in his office, watched the clock tick down those 45 minutes, and tried to prepare himself for the confrontation to come. Tried to find words that would make Sophia understand. Tried to believe that protecting the people you loved, even against their will, was still a form of love. But mostly, he just felt tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being right in ways that felt wrong. Tired of a life where love and control had become so tangled he couldn't separate them anymore. The clock hit 1 in the afternoon. Time to go meet his family. Time to see if there was any possibility of reconciliation, or if he'd finally pushed Sophia past the point of forgiveness. Time to discover if being right was worth being alone. The safe house was in Oak Park, a quiet suburb west of the city where tree-lined streets and Victorian homes created an illusion of normalcy. The house Dante had chosen was unremarkable from the outside, a 2-story craftsman with a deep front porch and mature landscaping that provided natural screening from the street. Inside, however, it was a fortress. Reinforced doors, bulletproof windows, a state-of-the-art security system, and a panic room disguised as a linen closet. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Dante arrived just after 2 in the afternoon, his driver pulling into the detached garage while 2 members of his security team swept the perimeter. The precautions were automatic, ingrained habits that he no longer questioned. Marco met him at the interior door, his expression carefully neutral. "They're in the living room, sir. Mrs. Delgado and Mrs. Park have been with them since arrival. The child seems to have adjusted well. The mother is less receptive." Define less receptive. "She hasn't spoken to anyone except to ask about exits and whether she's being held prisoner." Mrs. Delgado tried to offer refreshments, and Mrs. Moretti asked if the food was drugged. Marco's tone remained professional, but Dante detected a hint of sympathy beneath it. "She's scared, sir, and angry." Of course she was. Dante had pulled her from her apartment with armed security, transported her to an unknown location, and was keeping her in a house she hadn't chosen, surrounded by people she didn't trust. From Sophia's perspective, this was a nightmare. From his perspective, it was necessary protection. The gap between those two realities had always been their fundamental problem. He found them in the living room, a space decorated in soothing neutrals with comfortable furniture and enough natural light to avoid feeling like a bunker. Aria sat on the floor with a collection of toys that had been hastily assembled, her dark curls falling forward as she concentrated on stacking blocks. She looked content, unaware of the tension radiating from her mother. Sophia stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the quiet street. She didn't turn when Dante entered, but her spine stiffened, telegraphing her awareness of his presence. "Papa." Aria spotted him first, her face lighting up with pure joy. She abandoned her blocks and toddled toward him with arms outstretched. "Papa, Papa, you came. You came like you promised." Dante swept her into his arms, the familiar weight of her against his chest causing something to loosen in his ribcage. "Of course I came, Principessa. Papa always keeps his promises to you. Unlike his promises to adults," Sophia said, her voice flat and cold. She still hadn't turned from the window. Aria pulled back to look at Dante's face, her small hands patting his cheeks. "We went on an adventure today. We rode in a big car with nice ladies, and they gave me crackers, and now we're in a new house. Is this our new house, Papa? Are we going to live here?" "For a little while, baby girl," Dante said, his eyes on Sophia's rigid back. "Just until Papa makes sure everything is safe." "What's not safe?" Aria asked with the unfiltered curiosity of a 2-year-old. "Are there monsters?" "No monsters," he assured her. "Papa just wants to make sure you and Mama are protected." "From what?" "From things you don't need to worry about," Sophia interjected, finally turning from the window. Her face was composed, but her eyes held a fury that made Dante's chest tighten. Things that wouldn't be a problem if we'd been allowed to live our own lives. Aria looked between her parents, her joy dimming as she sensed the tension. Is Mama mad at you, Papa? Yes, Sophia answered before Dante could. Mama is very mad at Papa, right? Now, why? Because Papa didn't listen when Mama said she needed space. Because Papa made decisions without asking. Because Papa thinks he knows what's best for everyone without bothering to consider what they want. Each word was delivered with surgical precision, designed to wound. They hit their marks perfectly. Aria, sweetheart, Dante said gently, setting his daughter down. Why don't you go show Mrs. Delgado how high you can stack your blocks? I bet you can make a really tall tower. But I want to stay with you and Mama. And you will, Principessa. Papa just needs to talk to Mama for a few minutes first. Adult talk, very boring. He ruffled her curls affectionately. Then we'll all have dinner together, okay? I promise. The word promise made Sophia's expression harden further, but Aria nodded and returned to her blocks, accepting the explanation with the easy trust of childhood. Mrs. Delgado, a middle-aged woman who'd been with the Moretti family for 15 years, moved. Closer to Aria, ready to intervene if needed but giving them space. Dante gestured toward the hallway. Can we talk privately? Am I allowed to refuse? Sophia asked. Or will you just have your people drag me wherever you want, like you did from my apartment? No one dragged you anywhere. Semantics. I was given a choice between cooperating or being forced. That's not consent, Dante. That's coercion. He couldn't argue with that, so he didn't try. Instead, he walked down the hallway to a small study, trusting that Sophia would follow. She did, though her footsteps were heavy with reluctance. The study was small and functional, furnished with a desk, 2 chairs, and built-in bookshelves. Dante closed the door, giving them privacy but positioning himself between Sophia and the exit. Not to trap her, exactly, but to ensure she couldn't storm out before they'd had a chance to talk. You promised, she said, not bothering with preamble. Last night, you promised you'd respect my boundaries. You promised you wouldn't show up at my door, and less than 24 hours later, you sent armed men to collect us like we're your property. I received a threat, Dante said, forcing himself to remain calm. A phone call from someone who knew where you were, who made it clear that others might know as well. I couldn't leave you there, Sophia. Not when I knew you were vulnerable. Who called? What did they say exactly? He pulled out his phone, queued up the recording he'd made of the conversation, and played it for her. She listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When it finished, she shook her head. That's it? That's your credible threat? Some anonymous caller making vague implications? Vague implications that indicated you'd been compromised, that my surveillance had been noticed, that people knew where you were. Or it's someone from your own organization, testing your response, feeding your paranoia, giving you exactly the excuse you needed to violate my boundaries and drag us back into your control. She crossed her arms. How convenient that this threat materialized exactly when it did, right after I'd made you promise to stay away. The accusation stung because it had occurred to him as well. The timing was suspicious. The caller had known too much, had pushed exactly the right buttons. It could have been legitimate, or it could have been a setup. Someone within his organization who thought Dante was being too soft, who wanted to force his hand. Even if the call was manufactured, he said carefully, the underlying concern remains valid. You were living in an unsecured location. Anyone who wanted to find you could have done so. Or it proves how invasive your resources are, how little privacy anyone has when you decide they're your concern. Sophia moved to the window, though there was little to see beyond the neighboring house's brick wall. You can't see it, can you? You can't see that your protection is indistinguishable from imprisonment. I can see that you're alive, that Aria is safe, and that you're both in a location where I can ensure you stay that way. If that makes me a monster in your eyes, so be it. I'd rather have you hate me and live than love me and be dead. She turned to face him, and for the first time, he saw not just anger but exhaustion in her features. Deep lines bracketed her mouth, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her shoulders sagged with the weight of months spent looking over her shoulder. I'm so tired, Dante, she said quietly. Tired of fighting you, tired of running, tired of trying to give Aria a normal life when her father's shadow follows us everywhere. But I'm most tired of this conversation, this same circular argument where you justify control as protection, and I try to explain why autonomy matters. Then stop fighting, he suggested. Come home, accept the security, the resources, the life I can provide. Let me take care of you both properly, instead of forcing for you to struggle in inadequate apartments with elderly babysitters who can't protect you if something goes wrong. Mrs. Chen is a lovely woman who cares about Aria. Mrs. Chen is a civilian who would be helpless if anyone with training wanted to get to Aria through her, Dante corrected. She's kind and competent at childcare, but she's not a bodyguard. She's not equipped to deal with the realities of your situation. Our situation, Sophia said sharply. The situation you created by being who you are, doing what you do. Don't put this on me, Dante. I'm not the one who chose a life that makes security protocols necessary. You did. They were back to the fundamental impasse. She blamed him for the necessity of protection. He blamed her for refusing to accept it. Neither could see a path forward that didn't require the other to fundamentally change. What do you want from me? Dante asked, hearing the frustration bleed into his voice. Tell me what would make this acceptable. What would allow you to feel safe without feeling controlled? Sophia was quiet for a long moment, considering. When she spoke, her voice was softer but no less serious. I want you to give me real choices, not false choices between cooperating or being forced, real options with real autonomy, such as letting me leave right now. Let me and Aria go back to our apartment, or to a new location of my choosing, and trust that we'll be okay. Don't send surveillance. Don't have us followed. Don't interfere unless I specifically ask for help. You know I can't do that. Can't or won't. Can't, he emphasized. The threat is real, whether you believe it or not. Someone knows where you were. Someone was watching my operation closely enough to notice when I sent people to find you. That indicates a level of interest that doesn't just evaporate because you want it to. So what's your alternative? Keep us here indefinitely? Turn this into another gilded cage like the one I escaped from? No. The word came out more forcefully than he intended. This is temporary. Just until I identify who called, neutralize the threat, and ensure you can return to your life without risk. And how long will that take? Days? Weeks? Months? Years? She shook her head. You're asking me to put my life on hold, to let you dictate where I live and how I live, all based on a vague threat that might not even be real. Can you understand why that's unacceptable? He could understand it, but he also couldn't change his response to it. The fear that something might happen to them, that he might receive a call informing him that Sophia and Aria had been hurt or taken because he hadn't protected them adequately, overrode every other consideration. I'm not trying to control you, he said, knowing even as he spoke that she wouldn't believe him. I'm trying to keep you alive. If you can't see the difference, there is no difference, she interrupted. Not in practice. The effect is the same whether your motivation is malicious or protective. I still lose my freedom. I still lose my choices. I still become an object to be managed rather than a person to be respected. A knock at the door interrupted them. Marco's voice, apologetic. Sir, I'm sorry to intrude, but there's a situation that requires your attention. Dante's hand went automatically to the weapon holstered at his back. Years of training and paranoia activating instantly. What kind of situation? Not here. But it requires your immediate attention. Sophia watched this exchange with something like resignation in her eyes. Go, she said quietly. Whatever it is, I'm sure it's more important than this conversation. Nothing is more important than you and Aria, and yet you're leaving. Again. Always leaving when your business calls, when something more urgent requires the great Dante Moretti's attention. She moved toward the door, giving him space to exit. Go do whatever you need to do. Aria and I will be here when you get back. We don't have much choice in the matter, do we? The bitterness in her voice cut deeper than any accusation. Because she was right. He was leaving. Was prioritizing business over their conversation. Was proving her point about his inability to put family first. But the alternative was ignoring a potential threat, leaving a situation unmanaged, allowing chaos to flourish in his absence. His empire didn't run itself. His responsibilities didn't evaporate just because his personal life was in crisis. I'll be back in a few hours, he promised, knowing it sounded hollow. We'll finish this discussion then. Sure we will. She opened the door, her face carefully neutral now, all emotion locked away. Just like we'll finish all the other discussions we've started and never completed. Go, Dante. Your real life is calling. He wanted to argue, to stay, to prove that she was his real life, that she and Aria mattered more than any business crisis. But Marco's expression was grave, and years of training insisted that he assess the threat before making decisions. So he left, hating himself a little for it, knowing Sophia was watching him walk away and seeing confirmation of every fear she'd ever had about their marriage. In the car, Marco briefed him. "We have a problem with the Giordano family. Lorenzo Giordano is making noise about the Northside territory again, claiming we've been encroaching on their operations. He's called for a sit-down and wants to negotiate boundaries. But sir, based on the intelligence we've gathered, we believe this might be a setup, that he might be working with the Salvatores to force you into a vulnerable position." Dante listened, his mind already working through angles and responses. The Giordano family had been testing boundaries for months, pushing at the edges of Moretti territory, seeing how far they could expand before encountering resistance. It was a familiar dance in his world, the constant, jockeying for power and position. "What's the timeline on this sit-down?" "He wants to meet tonight. Neutral location, minimal security on both sides. He's insisting tonight, saying the situation is urgent enough that delay isn't acceptable." "Of course he is." Dante stared out the window at the passing suburbs, watching Oak Park give way to the city proper. "Because he knows I'm distracted right now. Knows that my focus is split. So he's pushing, seeing if he can gain advantage while I'm vulnerable." "That's our assessment as well." Marco hesitated. "Sir, you don't have to attend personally. I can handle this. Or we can send Angelo and Roberto. Let them negotiate on your behalf." It was tempting. Let someone else deal with Lorenzo Giordano's posturing while Dante focused on his family. But delegating this kind of negotiation sent a message of weakness, suggesting that the Moretti leadership was faltering. And in his world, perceived weakness became actual vulnerability very quickly. "No," he decided. "I'll attend. But with our full security complement, regardless of what Lorenzo requested. And I want intelligence on his movements for the past week. If this is a trap, I want to know before I walk into it." They spent the drive back to the estate planning, coordinating, preparing for every contingency. By the time they arrived, Dante had pushed thoughts of Sophia and Aria to a compartment in his mind where they couldn't interfere with the cold calculation required for this kind of work. It was a skill he'd developed years ago, the ability to separate emotional concerns from business necessities. His father had called it the Moretti discipline. His mother called it emotional compartmentalization. Sophia had called it one of the many ways he failed as a husband. Maybe they were all right. The meeting with Lorenzo Giordano took place in a warehouse on the edge of the meatpacking district, a neutral zone that neither family controlled exclusively. Dante arrived with 8 men, more than Lorenzo had requested but fewer than he'd wanted to bring. A compromise that satisfied no one, which meant it was probably close to correct. Lorenzo was already there, a man in his late 50s with silver hair, and the kind of face that appeared grandfatherly until you looked at his eyes and saw the calculation beneath the charm. He greeted Dante with false warmth, gestures for him to sit, and ordered coffee as if they were old friends meeting for a casual chat rather than rivals negotiating territory. "Dante, thank you for coming on such short notice. I know you have personal matters demanding your attention." The implication was clear. Lorenzo knew about Sophia and Aria, knew about the separation, probably knew about the relocation this morning. Information traveled fast in their world, and Lorenzo had always maintained an excellent intelligence network. "My personal matters are handled," Dante replied coolly. "What couldn't wait, Lorenzo? What's so urgent that you need to sit down immediately? Your operations on the north side have been expanding, into territories we've held for 30 years. I'm sure it's not intentional, just overeager lieutenants pushing boundaries without authorization. But it needs to stop before someone gets hurt." Dante sipped the coffee, buying time to consider his response. The accusation had merit. Carlo, his Northside lieutenant, had been aggressive lately, pushing into areas that had traditionally been Giordano territory. Dante had approved some of it, seeing opportunities that he'd told Carlo to exploit, but he'd also emphasized discretion, avoiding direct confrontation. Apparently, Carlo had interpreted those instructions loosely. "I'll speak to my people," Dante said neutrally. "Ensure they understand the boundaries. But Lorenzo, you and I both know this works both ways. Your family has been testing our South Side operations for months. Don't pretend this is one-sided encroachment." Lorenzo smiled, acknowledging the hit. "Perhaps we've both been opportunistic. The question is whether we want to turn this into a war, or whether we're smart enough to negotiate a lasting peace. What kind of peace did you have in mind?" What followed was 2 hours of careful negotiation, both men dancing around direct statements, trading concessions and demands in the coded language of their world. Territory was redrawn, operations reassigned, profit-sharing arrangements adjusted. It was tedious and necessary work, the kind of business that kept their empire functioning. But throughout it all, part of Dante's mind remained in Oak Park, in that safe house, wondering what Sophia was doing, whether Aria had asked for him, whether his absence was proof of everything Sophia believed about his priorities. The meeting concluded with a tentative agreement, one that would need to be formalized in writing and approved by both families. But the immediate crisis was resolved, the potential for violence, defused, at least temporarily. As Dante stood to leave, Lorenzo caught his arm. A word of advice, Dante. Man to man, not family to family. What advice? Whatever's happening with your wife, with your daughter, fix it, because a man who's distracted is a man who makes mistakes. And in our world, mistakes get people killed. His grip tightened slightly. I've been hearing things. Rumors about you being soft, about you losing focus. Your enemies are watching, waiting for an opening. Don't give them one. Dante pulled his arm free, his expression cold. My focus is fine, and anyone who thinks otherwise is welcome to test that assumption. Lorenzo held up his hands in mock surrender. Just friendly advice. Take it or leave it. In the car, Marco was quiet for several minutes before speaking. He's right, you know. About the rumors. I don't pay attention to rumors. Maybe you should, because they're affecting how people perceive you. Some of your own people are questioning your judgment, wondering if you're too compromised to lead effectively. Dante's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice level. And what do you think, Marco? Am I too compromised? I think you're trying to do something impossible. Trying to be Dante Moretti, the family head, and Dante Moretti, the husband and father, and finding that those roles require mutually exclusive choices. Something has to give, sir. You need to decide which role takes priority. It was the same impossible choice, stated by yet another person. His business or his family, his empire or his daughter, the life he'd built or the life Sophia wanted for them. What if I'm not willing to choose? Dante asked quietly. What if I insist on finding a way to have both? Marco's expression was sympathetic but skeptical. Then you're either the most stubborn man I've ever met, or the most delusional. Probably both. They returned to Oak Park after midnight. The house was dark except for a single light in the living room, where Mrs. Delgado sat reading, ready to respond if Aria woke. She stood when Dante entered, her expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Moretti and the child are asleep, sir. Dinner went well. The little one asked for you several times, but Mrs. Moretti explained you'd return in the morning. Did Sophia say anything else? Only that she'd appreciate if you slept somewhere other than this house tonight. That she and Aria need space. Of course. Even in her own imprisonment, Sophia was finding ways to assert boundaries, to claim some measure of control over her situation. I'll be in the back cottage, Dante told Mrs. Delgado. Call me immediately if there's any problem. The cottage was a small structure at the rear of the property, originally built as a guest house, but now serving as quarters for rotating security personnel. It was Spartan but functional. A bedroom, bathroom, and small sitting area. Enough space to sleep and plan. Nothing more. Dante lay on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling and replaying the day's events. The threatening phone call. The decision to relocate Sophia and Aria. The confrontation with Sophia. The meeting with Lorenzo. Each decision had seemed necessary in the moment, justified by circumstances. But strung together, they formed a pattern that even he could see was problematic. Control. Always defaulting to control. Always choosing the path that gave him maximum authority over the situation, regardless of how others might feel about being managed. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. I heard about today. We need to talk. Of course she'd heard. Rosa Moretti had sources throughout the organization, decades of relationships that kept her informed about everything significant happening in the family business. She'd probably known about the relocation before Sophia had. Tomorrow? He typed back. Tonight I'm too tired for lectures. Not a lecture. A conversation between a mother and her son. Come to the house for breakfast. 7 sharp. It wasn't a request, really. Rosa didn't make requests. She made statements that carried the weight of expectation and the promise of consequences if ignored. Fine. 7. He set his phone aside and closed his eyes, knowing sleep would be elusive. Somewhere in the main house, Sophia and Aria slept, protected by his security, and trapped by his choices. And tomorrow he would have to face both his mother's judgment and Sophia's anger, would have to defend decisions he was increasingly unsure he could justify. But for now, in the quiet hours before dawn, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his choices, allowed himself to wonder if Lorenzo and Marco and his mother and Sophia were all right, if he was trying to do something impossible, if his refusal to choose between family and business would ultimately cost him both. The question that haunted him as sleep finally came was the same one that had plagued him for months. What did it mean to love someone if your way of loving them destroyed the very thing you loved? He didn't have an answer, but as the gray light of dawn began to filter through the cottage windows, he knew he needed to find one soon, before the gap between his intentions and his actions grew too wide to bridge, before Sophia's anger hardened into permanent estrangement, before Aria grew old enough to understand that her father's protection came at a cost to her mother's freedom. Time was running out. The question was whether he could change fast enough to salvage what remained of his family, or whether the man he'd become was too hardened, too controlled, too certain of his own rightness to ever truly bend. Dante arrived at his mother's estate at 7, exhausted and bracing for her judgment. Rosa sat in her conservatory, coffee already poured, her expression unreadable. "Sit," she commanded, "and listen without arguing." He sat. "You've spent 8 months searching for them, and 24 hours destroying any chance of reconciliation," Rosa began, her voice sharp. "You had Sophia's trust for exactly 1 phone call, and you threw it away the moment it became inconvenient. There was a threat. There's always a threat, Dante. Always an excuse. Always a reason why your control is justified." She leaned forward. "But here's what you haven't considered. The greatest threat to your family isn't some rival or enemy. It's you. Your inability to trust. Your need to manage every variable. Your certainty that only your way keeps them safe." The words hit harder than any accusation Sophia had leveled, because his mother knew him completely, saw through every justification to the fear beneath. "What would you have me do?" he asked quietly. "Just let them live unprotected? I'd have you give Sophia what she actually needs instead of what you think she needs. Real autonomy, real choice, real trust that she can protect herself and Aria without your constant interference. And if something happens, then something happens," Rosa interrupted. "Life has risks, Figlio. You can't eliminate them all. You can only decide whether the cost of trying is worth what you lose in the process." Dante returned to Oak Park at 9. Sophia was in the kitchen with Aria, making breakfast. His daughter's face lit up when she saw him, but Sophia's expression remained carefully neutral. "Papa, Mama's making pancakes." "That sounds wonderful, Principessa." He met Sophia's eyes over Aria's head. "Can we talk? After breakfast?" She nodded once, wary but willing. An hour later, with Aria occupied with toys under Mrs. Delgado's supervision, Dante and Sophia sat across from each other in the study. He'd rehearsed this conversation in his mind a dozen times. Now, facing her, all his prepared words evaporated. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About yesterday. About how I've handled everything. You were right that my protection and my control have become indistinguishable. That I've prioritized my fears over your autonomy." Sophia's expression didn't soften. "Acknowledging the problem doesn't fix it, Dante. I know, which is why I'm making you an offer. A real choice, not a false one." He took a breath. "You and Aria can leave. Today, if you want. I'll provide financial support, security at a distance if you'll accept it, and regular visitation with Aria. But I won't track you, won't surveil you, won't interfere in your life beyond what you explicitly agree to." Her eyes widened with surprise. "You're serious?" "Completely. My mother helped me understand something this morning. That keeping you safe but miserable isn't love. It's selfishness dressed up as protection." He held her gaze. "So I'm choosing to trust you. To trust that you can build a good life for Aria. To trust that you'll let me be part of that life, on terms we both agree to." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, studying his face for signs of manipulation. "And if I choose to leave, you won't change your mind tomorrow?" "Won't. Some new threat justifies taking that choice away?" "I won't," he promised, "because I finally understand that losing you by respecting your choices is better than keeping you by destroying your trust." She looked away, and he saw tears in her eyes. "I didn't want to leave you, Dante. I wanted you to change, to see that your world and the way you controlled everything in it was suffocating us both. I know, and I'm trying to change. But Sophia, I need you to understand something too. I can't walk away from the family business overnight. It's not that simple. There are obligations, commitments, people who depend on me. I understand that, she said quietly. I'm not asking you to abandon your responsibilities. I'm asking you to let me have mine, to let me make choices about my life and Aria's life, to be a partner, not a subject. What if we tried again? The words came out more vulnerable than he'd intended. Not going back to how things were, but building something new, where you have real autonomy, real say in decisions, where security is negotiated between us instead of imposed by me. How would that even work? I don't know exactly. We'd have to figure it out together. But maybe you and Aria could live somewhere of your choosing, somewhere that feels like home to you. I'd respect your boundaries, your schedule, your decisions, and in exchange, you'd let me be present in Aria's life. Let me learn how to be her father without being your jailer. Sophia stood, moving to the window. Dante watched her profile, seeing the exhaustion and hope warring in her expression. I need time, she said finally. Real time, not a few hours. Time to think about whether I can trust this version of you. Time to see if you can actually follow through on these promises. How much time? A month. Let me and Aria go back to our apartment, or somewhere new if you're right that it's compromised. Let us live our lives without your interference. And at the end of that month, if you've actually respected my boundaries, we'll talk about what comes next. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to negotiate for weekly check-ins or security protocols or some measure of control. But he forced himself to nod. 1 month. And Sophia, I meant what I said last night on the phone. I love you, both of you. More than the business, more than my pride, more than my need for control. I just needed to lose you to understand that. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. I love you too, Dante. I always have. That was never the problem. The problem was whether love was enough when trust was broken. Can it be? Enough, I mean. I don't know yet, but I'm willing to find out if you are. He crossed the room, stopping just short of touching her, giving her space to close the distance or maintain it. She stepped forward, closing the gap, and let him hold her. Not possessively, not protectively, but simply. Two people who'd loved each other, lost each other, and might be finding their way back. 1 month, he whispered against her hair. I can do it in 1 month. We'll see, she replied. But there was hope in her voice. Fragile, tentative hope. It was enough. For now, it was enough. 3 weeks later, the text came at 2 a.m. She had a nightmare. Will you talk to her? Dante answered immediately, and Aria's tearful voice filled the silence of his bedroom. Papa, I dreamed you went away and didn't come back. I'm here, Principessa. Always here when you need me. Want to hear about the stars? Yes, please. He talked until her breathing slowed, until Sophia's voice came back on the line saying she was asleep. Thank you, Sophia whispered, for keeping your promise, for giving us space. Thank you for calling, for letting me be part of her life. A pause. Then, maybe coffee this week? The 3 of us? If you're free. I'm free, he said immediately. Whenever you want. After she hung up, Dante lay in the darkness and smiled. It wasn't everything. It wasn't the family under one roof that he'd envisioned. But it was something real, something earned, something built on trust instead of control. It was the beginning. And this time, he wouldn't waste it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.